The Legend of Zelda is a beloved video game franchise that has captivated millions of players for nearly 4 decades. But beneath its whimsical exterior lies a surprising history of controversy. From hate symbols hidden in dungeons to heated debates over art styles, the Zelda series has sparked more arguments than you might expect from a tale about an elf boy saving a princess. So, what controversies have rocked this legendary franchise over the years? Well, when you are ready, grab a cookie and hot chocolate, sit back, and join me in this deep dive into the controversial history of The Legend of Zelda. Welcome to the early days of Zelda, where rescuing a princess couldn't save Nintendo from controversy. Let's dive into the drama that surrounded the birth of this iconic franchise. In 1986, Nintendo releases The Legend of Zelda for the Famicom Disk System in Japan. It markets this new Zelda franchise as a game for kids. The game introduces players to the land of Hyrule, where a young hero named Link must save Princess Zelda from the evil Ganon. Nobody expects that this adventure will spark debates that last for decades. One of the first controversies emerges from an unexpected place, the game's third dungeon. Eagle-eyed players notice that the dungeon's layout resembles a certain controversial symbol when viewed on the map screen. Initially, everyone was asking, why would Nintendo hide a very controversial symbol in such a child-friendly game? Well, this symbol is actually known as a manji in Japan. It holds religious significance in Buddhism and represents good fortune. But from the perspective of Westerners, it is a big no-no. The dungeon layout isn't the only element that undergoes scrutiny during the localization process. Nintendo of America has a policy against including real-world religious references in their games. This leads to several changes in the Western release of The Legend of Zelda. One notable alteration involves the Book of Magic, an item Link can use to upgrade his weapon. In the Japanese version, this item is called a Bible, explaining the cross symbol on its cover. For the Western release, though, Nintendo changes the name to avoid the explicit religious connection. Interestingly, not all religious imagery is removed from the game. Link's shield prominently features a cross design, which remains unchanged in all versions. The reasons behind this inconsistency are unclear, but it demonstrates the complex nature of localization decisions. Despite these early controversies, The Legend of Zelda becomes a massive success worldwide. The game's innovative gameplay and expansive world captivate players, overshadowing any debates about its content. But little do fans know, this is just the beginning of a long history of controversies surrounding the beloved franchise. In 1987, Nintendo releases Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link for the Famicom Disk System in Japan, with international releases following in 1988. The game continues the story of Link, now on a quest to awaken a slumbering Princess Zelda. From the moment players boot up the game, they encounter a radically different game, though. The top-down view is replaced by side-scrolling action, RPG elements like experience points and leveling are introduced, and combat requires precise timing and movement. The world map now resembles traditional RPGs, with random encounters leading to side-scrolling battles. These changes create a steeper learning curve and mark a significant departure from the original Legend of Zelda's straightforward gameplay, setting Zelda 2 apart as a unique entry in the series. While some players appreciate the fresh take on the Zelda formula, many find the drastic changes jarring. The increased difficulty, unfamiliar gameplay mechanics, and departure from the established Zelda style lead to mixed reactions from fans and critics. As the Zelda series continues to evolve, Zelda 2 stands out as an anomaly. Future titles largely return to the top-down or 3D perspective, abandoning many of the RPG and side-scrolling elements introduced in this game. This unique position in the franchise's history earned Zelda 2 the unofficial title of the Black Sheep of the series. After the wild ride that was Zelda 2, Nintendo decides it's time to get back to basics. A Link to the Past arrives on the scene in 1991, ready to dazzle players with its shiny new Super Nintendo graphics and a return to top-down gameplay. But even as it takes a step back towards familiar territory, it can't quite escape the shadow of controversy. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past launches in Japan on November 21st, 1991 for the Super Famicom. The game brings the series back to its roots, featuring a top-down perspective and gameplay more reminiscent of the original NES title. But behind the scenes, Nintendo is already preparing for potential issues with the game's Western release. In Japan, the game bears the title Zelda no Densetsu Kamigami no Triforce. I completely just butchered that. This translates to The Legend of Zelda Triforce of the Gods. This name directly references the game's central plot element, the sacred Triforce created by the three golden goddesses. But Nintendo of America has concerns about using such overt religious terminology in the title. As a result, when the game releases in North America on April 13th, 1992, it sports a new name, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. This change helps avoid any potential controversy over religious references while still maintaining a connection to the game's story and themes. The title isn't the only element that undergoes changes during a localization. Nintendo continues its practice of removing or altering content that might be perceived as religious in nature. This decision affects various aspects of the game, from dialogue to visual elements. One notable change involves a character named Aganem. In the Japanese version, he is referred to as a priest, but in the Western release, his title is changed to Wizard, removing the religious connotation while maintaining his role as a powerful and mysterious figure. The localization team also alters some of the game's visual elements. For example, the original Japanese version features Egyptian hieroglyphs in certain areas, which are replaced with more abstract symbols in the Western release. This change likely stems from a desire to avoid any potential cultural or religious associations. Despite these alterations, A Link to the Past manages to retain much of its original story and themes. The game still revolves around the Triforce and the three goddesses who created it, though with slightly less explicit religious overtones in the Western version. Regardless, A Link to the Past goes on to become one of the most beloved entries in the Zelda series, with many fans considering it a high point for 2D Zelda games. In 1993, Nintendo takes the Legend of Zelda series in a new direction with Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. This marks the first portable entry in the franchise and introduces players to the mysterious Koholint Island. While the game receives praise for its innovative storytelling and gameplay, it also brings with it two new controversies that highlight the ongoing challenges of localizing Japanese games for Western audiences. The first controversy centers around a seemingly innocuous character, a hippo in Animal Village. In the Japanese version, players who enter the hippo's house find her posing as a nude model for a painter. The sprite clearly shows the hippo with visible breasts, and when Link enters the room, she quickly covers herself with a towel. This scene raises eyebrows in America. Concerned about potential backlash in the more conservative Western markets, Nintendo of America makes the decision to alter the hippo's sprite. In the Western release, the hippo's breasts are removed entirely, as is the towel she uses to cover herself. Ironically, she is now completely stripped. The hippo isn't the only character to raise concerns. A mermaid character also undergoes significant changes in the transition from east to west. In the Japanese version of Link's Awakening, Link encounters a mermaid who has lost her bikini top. She asks Link to help find it, creating a mildly risque mini-quest for players. For the Western release, though, Nintendo of America deems this scenario inappropriate for their target audience. The mermaid's lost item is thus changed from a bikini top to a necklace. Her dialogue is also adjusted accordingly, removing any hint of the original, more suggestive scenario. The changes sparked debates within the gaming community. Some players support Nintendo's decision, believing the changes make the game more appropriate for a wider audience, including younger players. Others argue that Nintendo is engaging in unnecessary censorship, removing harmless content that adds character and humor to the game. Interestingly, these changes are not universal across all Western releases. The original French and German versions of Link's Awakening retain the uncensored hippo and mermaid scenes, more closely matching the Japanese release. It's not until the release of Link's Awakening DX, the Game Boy Color remake, that these versions also receive the censored sprites and dialogue. Despite these controversies, Link's Awakening becomes a critical and commercial success, praised for its engaging story and innovative gameplay. The game's unique setting, memorable characters, and twist ending sets it apart from previous Zelda titles and helps establish the series' reputation for narrative experimentation. As the gaming world hurtles towards the 3D era, Nintendo prepares to unleash a legend that will change everything. But with great power comes great scrutiny, and the next chapter in the Zelda saga is about to face its toughest challenges yet. Welcome to 1998, where 3D graphics are all the rage and Nintendo is about to drop a powder keg. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is about to burst onto the scene, ready to revolutionize gaming and accidentally stir up the fan base. Indeed, before the game even launches, Nintendo seemingly cannot help but make a blunder. As the company ramps up its marketing for Ocarina of Time, they release a controversial commercial. The ad ends with the tagline, "Willst thou get the girl?" Or "Play like one?" This phrasing immediately comes under scrutiny. Critics argue it's blatantly sexist, implying that playing like a girl is inferior or undesirable. They point out it alienates female gamers, who make up a growing portion of the audience, and perpetuates harmful stereotypes about gender and gaming skill. Nintendo scrambles to address the situation. Marketing executives hold meetings to discuss damage control strategies. Responding to the backlash, Nintendo quickly changes the tagline to "Whilst thou soar?" or "Whilst thou suck?" The new wording maintains the Old English style while removing the gendered language. They hope this will quell the controversy while still maintaining the medieval fantasy tone they're aiming for. Nintendo also issues a brief statement acknowledging the concerns raised by fans and reaffirming their commitment to creating games for all players. Despite the controversy, Ocarina of Time launches on November 21st, 1998 for the Nintendo 64, instantly capturing the hearts of gamers worldwide. The game transports players into a fully realized 3D version of Hyrule, complete with scenic landscapes, intricate dungeons, and a time-traveling story. But beneath its groundbreaking surface, Ocarina of Time harbors a few elements that soon become the subject of controversy. One of the first ones to emerge involves the music in the Fire Temple. The original version of the game includes a background chant that samples an Islamic prayer. This chanting, while atmospheric, raises concerns about the use of religious content in a video game context. Nintendo acts quickly to address the issue. In later versions of the game, including the 1.2 cartridges and subsequent re-releases, the Islamic chanting is removed from the Fire Temple music. The revised soundtrack replaces the chant with a more generic vocalization, maintaining the eerie atmosphere without the religious aspects. Another point of contention arises from the symbol associated with the Gerudo, a race of desert-dwelling thieves in the game. The original Gerudo symbol bears a striking resemblance to the Islamic star and crescent. Once again, Nintendo opts for a cautious approach. In later versions of Ocarina of Time, the Gerudo symbol is redesigned to remove any potential connection to Islamic imagery. The new design retains the desert theme while avoiding any real-world religious or cultural associations. The third notable change involves a rather colorful issue: blood. In the original release of Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf, the game's main antagonist, coughs up red blood during a cutscene. While this may seem minor by today's standards, it proves to be a sticking point for Nintendo's family-friendly image in the 90s. In response to concerns about violence and to maintain a lower age rating, Nintendo alters the color of Ganondorf's blood from red to green in subsequent versions of the game. It's worth noting that these changes are not made uniformly across all versions and regions. Some early cartridges still contain the original content, leading to debates about which version of the game is the true Ocarina of Time. Despite these controversies, Ocarina of Time's impact on the gaming industry remains undeniable. The game receives universal acclaim for its innovative gameplay, rich storytelling, and technical achievements. It sets a new standard for 3D action-adventure games and continues to be regarded as one of the greatest video games ever made. But just when fans thought they had Zelda all figured out, Nintendo decides to throw a wrench into the picture. The Legend of Zelda. Majora's Mask crashes into the Nintendo 64 like a moon on a collision course. Majora's Mask launches in Japan on April 27, 2000, with North American and European releases following later that year. The game serves as a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, following Link on a strange new adventure in the land of Termina. From the moment players start the game, they realize this isn't your typical Zelda experience. Gone are the fields of Hyrule and the straightforward quest to save Princess Zelda. Instead, players find themselves in a world teetering on the brink of destruction, with only 3 days to prevent total catastrophe. The game's central mechanic, the 3-day time loop, proves to be one of its most divisive elements. Players must relive the same 3 days repeatedly, resetting the clock to prevent the moon from crashing into Termina. This time pressure creates a sense of urgency, unlike anything seen in previous Zelda games. Some gamers cry foul at the prospect of losing progress every 72 in-game hours, dramatically comparing it to the punishing world of roguelikes. The moon threatens to ruin their day and their save file as they scramble to beat the clock. They argue that it detracts from the exploration and leisurely pace typically associated with Zelda games. Meanwhile, Majora's defenders roll their eyes, insisting it's all part of the charm. They patiently explain that key items stick around and the friendly neighborhood banker is happy to safeguard your rupees. Still, the game's time-crunching ways continue to ruffle feathers. The game's darker themes also spark debate. Majora's Mask delves into subjects like death, grief, and existential dread in ways that previous Zelda titles had not. The oppressive atmosphere and unsettling imagery, such as the grimacing moon looming overhead, create a markedly different tone from the series' usual themes. Some fans feel the dark themes are too much of a departure from the Zelda they know and love. They miss the more straightforward heroics and lighter tone of previous games. For these players, Majora's Mask strays too far from what makes Zelda special. Despite the divided opinions, Majora's Mask goes on to become a cult classic within the Zelda franchise. Its unique approach to storytelling and gameplay mechanics continue to inspire discussion and analysis years after its release. While it may not have achieved the universal acclaim of its predecessor, it carves out its own special place in Zelda history, beloved by many for the very elements that make it so controversial. Now, with Majora's Mask, Nintendo has proved it can subvert expectations and still deliver a classic Zelda experience. But for the company's next trick, the team behind The Legend of Zelda is quietly working on a project that will divide the fanbase like never before. The winds of change are blowing, and they're about to carry Link into uncharted waters. It's 2001, a time of innocence, when gamers dreamed of hyper-realistic graphics and Nintendo was about to pull the rug out from under everyone's feet. Unbeknownst to fans, their expectations were about to be blown out of the water, and not necessarily in the way they hoped. At the Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3, in May 2001, Nintendo unveils a tech demo showcasing the graphical capabilities of their upcoming GameCube console. The demonstration features a realistic-looking battle between Link and Ganondorf, rendered in a style reminiscent of Ocarina of Time, but with significantly improved graphics. The tech demo immediately captures the attention of Zelda fans and the gaming media. The sight of a mature, detailed Link clashing swords with Ganondorf in fluid, realistic combat sets expectations sky high for the next installment in the series. Fans begin to speculate about a gritty, adult-oriented Zelda game that will push the boundaries of the GameCube's hardware. In the months following E3, excitement continues to build. Gaming magazines and websites are full of speculation about what the next Zelda game might look like. Many assume that the tech demo is a preview of the actual game in development, despite Nintendo never explicitly stating this. The expectations built by the E3 2001 tech demo are about to collide head-on with Nintendo's actual vision for the future of Zelda, leading to a controversy that will shape discussions about the series for years to come. In August 2001, at Nintendo's Space World event, the company finally unveils the next installment in the Zelda series. Remember that gritty, realistic Link you were dreaming of? Well, how about a cartoon character instead? The game, which will later be titled The Wind Waker, features a drastically different art style from what fans were expecting. Instead of the realistic graphics showcased in the E3 2001 tech demo, Nintendo presents a cel-shaded, cartoon-like Link sailing on a vibrant, stylized ocean. The reveal sends shockwaves through the gaming world. Fans who had been anticipating a mature and realistic Zelda game are taken aback by the cartoony aesthetics. The new Link, with his large expressive eyes and exaggerated proportions, is a far cry from the heroic figure they had envisioned. Almost immediately, backlash erupts across gaming forums and magazines. They criticize the new art style as childish and accuse Nintendo of dumbing down the series. The term cel-da is coined as a derogatory nickname for the game, highlighting the disappointment many feel about the cel-shaded graphics. Nintendo, caught off guard by the intensity of the negative reaction, finds itself in the position of having to defend its creative choices. The key figures behind the game's development explain that the cel-shaded style allows for more expressive characters and a unique visual identity for the game. Despite the developers' explanations, the controversy continues to boil. Gaming media outlets run countless articles debating the merits and drawbacks of the new art style. Some defend Nintendo's bold artistic choice, while others join in the disappointment. As the game's release date approaches, the controversy shows no signs of slowing down. The Wind Waker becomes one of the most hotly debated topics in gaming, with fans and critics alike eagerly awaiting the chance to finally play the game and judge it on its merits beyond just its visual style. At long last, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker officially launches in Japan on December 13th, 2002, with international releases following in 2003. Despite the pre-release controversy, the game receives overwhelmingly positive reviews from critics. Many praise its innovative gameplay, expansive world, and yes, even its distinctive art style. As players dive into the game, they discover that the cel-shaded graphics allow for incredibly expressive characters. Link's facial expressions and body language convey emotion in ways that weren't possible with the more realistic styles of previous 3D Zelda games. This expressiveness adds depth to the storytelling and character interactions. In the years following its release, critics and players begin to recognize that the cel-shaded style allows for a timeless quality. While more realistic graphics from the same era quickly become dated, Wind Waker's visuals remain appealing years after its release. This longevity becomes a significant factor in the game's growing reputation. More and more players come to appreciate the game's unique aesthetic and the way it complements the gameplay and storytelling. The once belittled Toon Link becomes a beloved character in his own right, appearing in subsequent Zelda titles and even joining the Super Smash Bros. Today, The Wind Waker is a reminder of the dangers of judging a game before it's released. What was once considered a controversial departure for the series is now regarded as a classic, praised for its bold artistic vision and innovative gameplay. Sometimes, it seems, the most divisive choices can lead to the most memorable experiences. The winds of change have blown through the world of Zelda, leaving behind a legacy that defied expectations. But as one chapter closes, another opens, and this one promises to be just as divisive. Nintendo, ever the innovator, is set to take the series in a direction that will split the fanbase once again. This time, it's not just about how the game looks, but how it feels in players' hands. The next adventure in Hyrule is about to get physical, and not everyone is ready for the workout. Alright friends, it's time to wave goodbye to the cel-shaded seas and say hello to the Wii era. The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess launches on November 19th, 2006 for both the Nintendo GameCube and the newly released Wii. The game marks a significant shift in the series' visual direction, adopting a more realistic art style that harkens back to Ocarina of Time. This return to a more mature aesthetic is largely seen as Nintendo's attempt to appease fans who were disappointed by Wind Waker's cartoonish look. The new Link sports more realistic proportions, and the world of Hyrule is rendered in darker, more subdued tones. This visual choice aligns with the game's overall darker narrative and themes. The game's tone catches many parents off guard. For the first time in the franchise's history, a mainline Zelda game receives a rating of T for Teen, departing from the typical E for Everyone rating that fans have come to expect. This shift isn't due to increased violence or explicit content, but rather the game's darker, more mature tone and visual style. Parents, accustomed to viewing Zelda as a family-friendly series, now find themselves in a pickle as their excited children ask them to play the latest adventure in Hyrule. The T rating, while not prohibitive, raises concerns about the game's suitability for younger players and sparks debates about the evolving nature of the beloved franchise. According to critics, darkness permeates the game's story, characters, and overall atmosphere. From the outset, the game establishes a grim tone with the shocking abduction of village children, immediately raising the stakes and touching on real-world fears. Zant, the main antagonist, is portrayed as a ruthless usurper whose violent and disturbing actions add to the game's oppressive mood. The controversies don't end with this new rating, though. One of the most unusual aspects of Twilight Princess is its dual release on GameCube and Wii. To accommodate the Wii's motion controls, which map Link's sword to the player's right hand, Nintendo makes a surprising decision. They mirror the entire game world for the Wii version, effectively creating two different versions of Hyrule. In the GameCube version, Link is left-handed as he traditionally has been throughout the series. But in the Wii version, he becomes right-handed, and the entire world is flipped horizontally. This means that areas that were on the east side of the map in the GameCube version are now on the west side in the Wii version, and vice versa. The mirroring of the world layout becomes a point of controversy. Some praise the attention to detail in adapting the game for motion controls. Others, particularly particularly longtime Zelda fans find the change disorienting, especially if they're familiar with the traditional layout of Hyrule. While Twilight Princess receives generally positive reviews, it also faces criticism for playing it safe with the Zelda formula. Many reviewers and players note strong similarities between Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time in terms of structure, gameplay elements, and even some specific story beats. They point out similarities such as the game's opening in a small village, the structure of gathering several key items before a mid-game twist, and even specific dungeon designs that echo those from Ocarina. This perceived lack of innovation becomes a sticking point for some critics. While they acknowledge the game's high quality, they express disappointment that Nintendo didn't take more risks or introduce more new elements to the Zelda formula. Despite these criticisms, Twilight Princess is generally well received and becomes one of the best-selling games on both the GameCube and Wii. Its darker tone and more realistic graphics satisfy many fans who had been hoping for a more mature Zelda experience since the Ocarina of Time days. In retrospect, Twilight Princess represents an interesting moment in the Zelda series' evolution. It shows Nintendo responding directly to fan feedback, perhaps to a fault, while also trying to bridge the gap between traditional controls and the new motion control era. The game's legacy remains somewhat mixed, viewed by some as a pinnacle of the classic 3D Zelda style, and by others as a too-safe retread of familiar ground. But just when you thought it was safe to put down the Wiimote, Nintendo decides it's time for Zelda fans to get a real workout. Skyward Sword swoops in, ready to make you flail your arms like you're trying to swat away a swarm of chickens. The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword launches on November 18, 2011, exclusively for the Wii. The game serves as a prequel to the entire Zelda timeline, telling the origin story of the Master Sword and setting up the cyclical conflict between Link, Zelda, and Ganon. From the moment players boot up the game, it's clear that Skyward Sword is doing things differently. The game relies heavily on the Wii Motion Plus accessory, promising one-to-one motion controls for Link's sword movements. This means that players must physically swing the Wiimote in specific directions to execute different sword techniques. The motion controls extend beyond just swordplay. Many of Link's items and tools, from his arrows and bow to his flying beetle, require precise motions to use effectively. Even simple actions like picking up items or opening doors involve gestures with the Wiimote. As you might imagine, the practicality of this mechanic becomes a debated topic within the Zelda community. Some players find the reliance on motion controls frustrating and tiring. They argue that the controls are often imprecise or unresponsive, leading to missed attacks or unintended actions. Some players with physical limitations also express disappointment that the game is less accessible due to its heavy reliance on motion. For some players, though, these motion controls represent the pinnacle of immersion in a Zelda game. They praise the feeling of directly controlling Link's actions, arguing that it adds a new layer of strategy to combat and puzzle solving. Beyond the control scheme, Skyward Sword also faces criticism for its world design. Unlike previous 3D Zelda games that featured large, interconnected worlds, Skyward Sword opts for a more linear structure. The game is divided into distinct areas that players access from a central hub in the sky. This linear design allows for more focused, dungeon-like areas throughout the entire game. But some players feel that it lacks the sense of exploration and discovery that they associate with the Zelda series. They argue that the game feels more restrictive and less open than its predecessors. Defenders of the game's structure point out that the more linear design allows for tighter storytelling and more intricate puzzle design throughout the entire game, not just in traditional dungeons. They argue that this approach results in a more consistently challenging and engaging experience. Ultimately, the game is viewed by many as a flop, selling half as many games as others in the Zelda franchise. The debates over its motion controls and linear structure continue long after its release, making it one of the more polarizing entries in the Zelda series. With Skyward Sword, it seems Nintendo has pushed the boundaries of traditional Zelda gameplay as far as they can go. But as a new console generation dawns, the company is plotting a revolution that will shake the very foundations of the Zelda franchise. A new game is coming, and it's about to rewrite the rules of the game in ways that will leave everyone breathless. Hold on to your rupees, friends, because Nintendo is about to turn the Zelda formula on its head. Breath of the Wild is about to enter the scene, ready to make you question everything you thought you knew about saving Hyrule. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild launches on March 3rd, 2017, simultaneously for the Nintendo Switch and Wii U. From the moment players step out of the Shrine of Resurrection, it's clear that this is not your average Zelda game. Gone are the linear storylines and carefully guided progression of previous titles. Instead, players are thrust into a vast open Hyrule that they can explore in any direction they choose. After a brief tutorial area, the entire map becomes accessible, allowing for unprecedented freedom in a Zelda game. This open-world design represents a radical departure from the Zelda formula established over the previous 30 years. Many players and critics praise the sense of adventure and discovery that comes with being able to go anywhere and do anything from the start. However, the drastic shift also proves divisive among some longtime fans. Those who enjoyed the more structured approach of previous games, or like me who are directionally challenged, find the open world overwhelming and lacking in direction. They argue that the freedom comes at the cost of the tight, focused design that characterized earlier Zelda titles. One of the most controversial elements of Breath of the Wild is its weapon durability system. Unlike in previous games where Link would collect a small number of permanent weapons, players now find a wide variety of breakable weapons throughout the world. These weapons shatter after a certain amount of use, forcing players to constantly seek out new ones. Critics of the system find it frustrating and unnecessary. They argue that it discourages attachment to weapons and interrupts the flow of gameplay with constant weapon management. Some players express disappointment at not being able to keep and upgrade their favorite weapons throughout the game. Proponents of the durability system argue that it adds strategy to combat and encourages experimentation with different weapon types. They contend that it makes the world feel more dynamic and realistic, as players must adapt to their surroundings and use what they find. Another point of contention among fans is the lack of traditional dungeons in Breath of the Wild. Instead of the large themed dungeons that were a staple of previous 3D Zelda games, Breath of the Wild features 120 smaller shrines spread throughout the world, as well as 4 divine beasts that serve as mini dungeons. While many players appreciate the bite-sized challenge of the shrines and the unique designs of the divine beasts, others miss the epic scale and intricate puzzles of traditional Zelda dungeons. They argue that the shrines and divine beasts lack the distinct themes and memorable boss battles that made previous dungeons so iconic. Despite these controversies, Breath of the Wild receives universal acclaim upon release. Critics and players praise its innovative approach to open-world design, its physics-based gameplay systems, and the sheer sense of freedom it provides. The game goes on to win numerous Game of the Year awards, and is often hailed as one of the greatest video games ever made, setting a new standard for both the Zelda series and open-world games in general. But just when you thought it was safe to put your wallet away, Nintendo decides it's time for another trip to Hyrule. But this time, they're asking you to dig a little deeper into your rupee pouch. Welcome to Tears of the Kingdom, where the price tag might make you shed a few tears of your own. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom launches on May 12th, 2023, exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. As the highly anticipated sequel to Breath of the Wild, it immediately becomes the subject of intense discussion among fans and critics. One of the first points of controversy emerges before the game even hits shelves: its price point. Nintendo announces that Tears of the Kingdom will retail for $70, making it the company's first game to break the traditional $60 ceiling for new releases, which consumers already had a heated debate over back in the early 2000s. This price increase sparks debate within the gaming community. Some argue that the scope and quality of the game justify the higher cost, pointing to the rising expenses of game development. Others contend that the price hike is unnecessary, especially given Nintendo's history of maintaining lower price points compared to its competitors. The controversy over the game's cost is further fueled by discussions about the value proposition of Tears of the Kingdom. Fans question whether the game offers enough new content to warrant not only a full-price purchase, but an increased one at that. This debate leads directly into the second major point of contention surrounding Tears of the Kingdom: its reuse of the map from Breath of the Wild. When early footage and information about the game reveal that it takes place in a familiar version of Hyrule, reactions are mixed. Critics express disappointment at the lack of a completely new overworld to explore. They argue that part of the magic of a new Zelda game is discovering a fresh incarnation of Hyrule, and that reusing the map from Breath of the Wild diminishes this sense of discovery. Some players feel that the reuse of the overworld doesn't justify the increased cost, arguing that a $70 game should offer an entirely new world to explore. Supporters, however, argue that building upon the existing map allows for a deeper exploration of Hyrule's lore and history. They point out that the game adds new sky islands and underground areas, expanding the playable space vertically rather than horizontally. Despite these controversies, Tears of the Kingdom receives overwhelmingly positive reviews upon release. Critics praise its innovative new abilities, expanded storyline, and the ways it builds upon the foundation laid by Breath of the Wild. The game's commercial success seems to indicate that, for many players, the new content and gameplay mechanics justify both the familiar setting and the higher price point. And this brings us to the present. With The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom now released, we've yet to see what controversies this latest title will bring to the franchise. As the first mainline Zelda game to feature Princess Zelda as the playable protagonist, it's already breaking new ground. While many fans are thrilled to finally control the titular character, others argue that this deviation from tradition risks alienating longtime players who have grown attached to Link as the series' hero. Some critics worry that Zelda's magical abilities, particularly her power to copy objects and summon monsters, may fundamentally alter the gameplay mechanics that have defined the franchise for decades. There are concerns that these new elements could overshadow the exploration, puzzle solving, and combat that fans have come to expect from a Zelda title. So will fans embrace this bold departure from tradition, or will it spark debates like those surrounding Wind Waker's cel-shaded design? I suppose only time will tell, friends. As we've seen, The Legend of Zelda's journey through controversy mirrors the evolving landscape of gaming itself. From religious symbols to scandalous visuals, each debate has shaped the series. Nintendo's shifting stance on censorship and localization reflects an industry grappling with global audiences and diverse perspectives. Yet through it all, Zelda endures. Each new entry, including Echoes of Wisdom, continues to challenge our expectations and spark passionate discussions. The legend isn't just about Link or Zelda or even Hyrule. It's about us, the players, the critics, the dreamers who bring these worlds to life with every playthrough. As Echoes of Wisdom opens a new chapter in the saga, one thing is for sure: the legend is far from over. If you enjoyed diving into the controversial history of The Legend of Zelda, then you'll definitely want to check out the incredible story behind China's first AAA game, Black Myth: Wukong. From humble beginnings to record-breaking success, it's a tale of ambition, cultural pride, and overcoming immense challenges. So be sure to click on the video on screen now to learn how two ex-Tencent employees revolutionized the Chinese gaming industry. I'll be waiting for you there. In any event, please remember to like the video if you enjoyed this deep dive into Zelda's controversial past. Subscribe if you loved it, and let me know what controversy you found most surprising. Until next time, friends.